Hey everyone. So it took me a little longer than expected to get through this one, and it's another volume made up of many small articles that cover a range of topics. To some extent, the volumes are easier to get through when they contain bigger works, but when they contain a plethora of smaller articles, it's hard to kind of put them all together. In any case, I'm going to divide the articles into topics again, like the last video. Internal party affairs, Russian politics, international politics, and then theory. In the realm of theory and domestic Russian affairs, this volume sees Lenin's first real discussion of the national question. We've seen Lenin discuss petitions from the Bund, that is the Jewish section of the party, for a special designation, but we've not really seen Lenin talk much about what a democratic nationalist policy would look like. In the Fourth Duma, the question of indigenous languages emerged as a tense topic between liberals and black hundreds on the one hand, who unsurprisingly argued that within the empire, Russian needs to be the dominant language, and social democrats on the other hand, who were forced at this point to work out a new theory of nationalities. In The Working Class and the National Question, Lenin states bluntly that, quote, class-conscious workers stand in full unity among the workers of all nations, and that the policy of division is one maintained by liberals. In Theses on the National Question, we get a bit more clarification through a numbered list of points. Of note are point 3.A, which declares the party's unconditional hostility toward the use of force against national minorities, and point 6, which demands the promulgation of a law that protects the rights of every national minority. The question became acute over a dispute concerning the use of the Ukrainian language in primary schools. Cadets in the Duma wanted to prosecute Ukrainian, quote, separatists, and Lenin argues that Marxists are always, in principle, against the prosecution of national minorities who are unable to defend themselves. Finally, in Cultural National Autonomy, Lenin responds to Duma representatives who argued for the separation of schools along national lines. He is obviously not a fan of that policy, saying that it's a ruse to divide the working class, and he uses the experience of the American black population to make the case. He says, quote, as long as different nations live in a single state, they are bound to one another by millions and thousands of millions of economic, legal, and social bonds. How can education be extricated from these bonds? In the realm of internal party affairs, Lenin is still hammering his points against the liquidators. We don't need to get too into it, as I'm sure you already understand it from previous episodes. But what's unique in this volume is the intensification of liquidationist agitation, despite, as Lenin says, the unanimous decision of the party in 1909 and again in 1910 to renounce liquidationism. The idea of a, quote, open party emerged at a sensitive time of counter-revolution. So for the Bolsheviks, and Lenin in particular, the idea of an open party, fully legal, suspiciously opens the door for bourgeois influence. More importantly for internal party affairs, within the Fourth Duma, there are 13 social democratic representatives. In a vote before the adjournment of the State Duma in June 1913, 7 deputies voted to refuse Bolsheviks, the 6 other deputies, to have one of 2 seats in the Budget Committee. Lenin claims that this amounts to a liquidationist coup, and it has created a condition of open polemics in the press within the party. Most importantly, he argues that the vote went against the will of the workers, who the party and its deputies are supposed to represent. Lenin calls for these deputies to adjourn workers' representatives to hear them out. There are some really great theoretical morsels in this volume, particularly 3 component parts of Marxism, which provides a great schematic for teaching Marxism, breaking it down between German philosophy English political economy, and French socialism, which actually goes to many conversations I've had recently with people who teach capital and the various lenses through which they interpret that work. In Who Stands to Gain, Lenin provides a most poignant approach to assessing politics by simply asking oneself, who gains from this decision? As a good dialectical materialist, he knows that people make decisions based on what will ultimately benefit them economically. So it's important to ask. In politics, it's not so important who directly advocates particular views, he says. What is important is who stands to gain from these views, proposals, and these measures. In Armaments and Capitalism, he makes the point that by now is pretty obvious, I think, to a lot of people, but not so much back then in 1913. Simply put, war generates profit through the production and sale of armaments. The problem is that once states figure out how lucrative the market is, they set their sights on armaments buildup. Politicians, even in this day, in 1913, had stock interest in armaments manufacturing, and hence the rise of tensions between Britain and Germany. Marxism and reformism points out that while Marxists realize the struggle for reforms is integral to improve conditions, that it must be accompanied by a struggle against reformists who narrowly restrict their aims to reforms rather than revolution or social revolution. Finally, it's always been common for petty bourgeois adults to make the case that they don't want children because they don't want to introduce them to such a cruel world, or that they are incapable of raising children, which, to a certain extent, they often say with an ironic sense of self-importance, as though their incompetence is a sign of their frustrated intellectualism or something like that. This attitude was referred to as neo-Malthusianism in Lenin's time because it repurposed the old Malthusian argument that population could be curbed through the abstention of childbearing on behalf of the working class, the poor, and the petty bourgeois. Yet Lenin says that this kind of neo-Malthusianism is not for the working class, who need to have children to guarantee the continuation of the fight against injustice. This is Lenin telling you to have children if you can, to continue the fight. Internationally, we are on the eve of the First World War, and Lenin is commenting on the arms race between Britain and France, tensions that are emerging in the Balkans at the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and the triumphal Chinese Revolution that saw the foundation of the Chinese Republic, or as he calls it, the awakening of Asia. There's some articles on class war in Dublin and the Dublin Massacre, and some comments on the British Socialist Party if you're interested in that. So, thanks for listening. Until volume 20.